Out of the Silent Planet is a science fiction novel by the British author C.S. Lewis, published in 1938 by John Lane, The Bodley Head. 5 years later it was published in the US. 2 sequels were published in 1943 and 1945, completing the so-called Cosmic Trilogy or Space Trilogy. The fragment of another sequel, evidently set prior to Perelandra and that Hideous strength, was published as The Dark Tower in a 1977 collection of short fiction by Lewis and essays by 4 others, The Dark Tower and Other Stories. Origins: the trilogy was inspired and influenced by David Lindsay's A Voyage to Arcturus. According to biographer A.N. Wilson, Lewis wrote the novel after a conversation with J.R.R. Tolkien in which both men lamented the state of contemporary fiction. They agreed that Lewis would write a space travel story, and Tolkien would write a time travel one. Tolkien's story only exists as a fragment, published in The Lost Road and other writings edited by his son Christopher. A note precedes the text of the story. Certain slighting references to earlier stories of this type which will be found in the following pages have been put there for purely dramatic purposes. The author would be sorry if any reader supposed he was too stupid to have enjoyed Mr. H. G. Wells's fantasies or too ungrateful to acknowledge his debt to them. Plot: at the front door of a house in the country, Ransom hears shouting and struggling inside. When he hurries around back, he sees Weston and Devine trying to force Harry, a dull-witted young man, to enter a structure on the property against his will. Ransom intervenes, and Devine sees him as a better prospect than Harry for what he and Weston have in mind. With Weston's grudging consent, Devine offers Ransom a drink and accommodations for the night. After enjoying what he thinks is a glass of whiskey and soda, Ransom realizes that he has been drugged. He tries to escape but is subdued by Weston and Devine. When he regains consciousness he finds himself in a metallic spherical spacecraft en route to a planet called Malacandra. The wonder and excitement of such a prospect relieves his anguish at being kidnapped, but Ransom is put on his guard when he overhears Weston and Devine deliberating whether they will again drug him or keep him conscious when they turn him over to the inhabitants of Malacandra, the Sorns, as a sacrifice. Ransom is put to work as cook and scullion, but appropriates a knife and plans to escape when he gets the chance. Soon after the 3 land on the strange planet, Ransom gets his chance to run off into the unknown landscape, just after he sees the Sorns, tall alien creatures who terrify him. Ransom wanders around, finding many differences between Earth and Malacandra, in that all the lakes, streams, and rivers are warm. The gravity is significantly less. And the plants and mountains are strangely tall and thin. Ransom later meets a civilized native of Malacandra, a Hross named Hideous, a tall, thin, and furry creature. He becomes a guest for several months in Hideous' village, where he uses his philological skills to learn the language of the Hross and also learns their culture. In the process he discovers that gold, known to the Hross as sun's blood, is plentiful on Malacandra, and thus is able to discern Devine's motivation for making the voyage. Weston's motives are shown to be more complex. He is bent on expanding humanity through the universe, abandoning each planet and star system as it becomes uninhabitable. The Hross honor Ransom greatly by asking him to join them in a hunt for an ikra, a fierce water creature which seems to be the only dangerous predator on the planet, resembling both a shark and a crocodile. While hunting, Ransom and his Hross companions are told by an Eldil, an almost invisible creature reminiscent of a spirit or deva, that Ransom must go to meet Ohyaza, the Eldil who is ruler of the planet Euro, and indeed that he already should have done so. He hesitates to respond to the summons, as he wishes to proceed with the hunt. Hideous, after killing the Necra with Ransom's help, is shot dead by Devine and Weston, who are seeking Ransom in order to take him prisoner and hand him over to the Tsar Copyright Roni. Ransom is told by Hideous' friend that this is the consequence of disobeying Ohyaza, and that Ransom must now cross the mountains to escape Weston and Devine and fulfill his orders. On his journey, Ransom finally meets a Sorn, as he long feared he might. He finds, however, that the Tsar Copyright Roni are peaceful and kindly. Orgray explains to him the nature of Ohyaza's body, and that of all Eldila. The next day, carrying the human on his shoulders, Augrey takes Ransom to Olyaza. After a stop at the dwelling place of an esteemed Sorn scientist, wherein Ransom is questioned thoroughly regarding all manner of facts about Earth, Ransom finally makes it to Meldalorn, the home of Olyaza. In Meldalorn, Ransom meets a Fifiltric who tells him of the beautiful houses and artwork his race make in their native forests. Ransom then is led to Olyaza and a long-awaited conversation begins. In the course of this conversation it is explained that there are Olyar copyright Risu for each of the planets in our solar system. In the 4 inner planets, which have organic life, the local Olyaza is responsible for that life. The ruler of Earth has turned evil and has been restricted to Thalcandra, after Great War, by the Olyar copyright Risu and the authority of Maleldil, the ruler of the universe. Ransom is ashamed at how little he can tell Olyaza about Earth and how foolish he and other humans seem to Olyaza. While the two are talking, Devine and Weston are brought and guarded by Hrossa, because they have killed 3 of that race. Olyaza then directs a Fifiltric to scatter the movements that were the bodies of Hioi and the 2 other Hrossa, using a small, crystalline instrument. Once touched with this instrument, the bodies vanish. Weston makes a long speech justifying his proposed invasion of Malacandra on progressive and evolutionary grounds, which Ransom attempts to translate into Malacandrian, thus laying bare the brutality and crudity of Weston's ambitions. Olyaza listens carefully to Weston's speech and acknowledges that the scientist is acting out of a sense of duty to his species, and not mere greed. This renders him more mercifully disposed towards the scientist, who accepts that he may die while giving man the means to continue. However, on closer examination Olyaza points out that Weston's loyalty is not to man's mind, or he would equally value the intelligent alien minds already inhabiting Malacandra, instead of seeking to displace them in favor of humanity. Nor to man's body, since, as Weston is well aware of and at ease with, man's physical form will alter over time, and indeed would have to in order to adapt to Weston's program of space exploration and colonization. It seems then that Weston is loyal only to the seed man's DNA, which he seeks to propagate. When Olyaza questions why this is an intelligible motivation for action, Weston's eloquence fails him and he can only articulate that if Olyaza does not understand man's basic loyalty to man then he, Weston, cannot possibly instruct him. Olyaza, passing judgment, tells Weston and Devine that he would not tolerate the presence of such creatures, but lets them leave the planet immediately, albeit under very unfavorable orbital conditions. Olyaza offers Ransom the option of staying on Malacandra, but Ransom decides he does not belong there, perhaps because he feels himself unworthy and perhaps because he yearns to be back among the human beings of Earth. Olyaza gives the men 90 days' worth of air and other supplies, telling the Thalcandrians that after 90 days, the ship will disintegrate so that whether they make it back to Earth or not, they will never return to Malacandra. Weston and Devine do not further harm Ransom, focusing their attention on the perilous journey home. Olyaza had promised Ransom that the Eldila of Deep Heaven would watch over and protect him against any attacks from the other 2 Thalcandrians, who might seek to kill him as a way of economizing their air and food supplies. At times, Ransom is conscious of benevolent presences within the spaceship the Eldila. After a difficult return journey, the spaceship makes it back to Earth, and is shortly unbodied according to Olyaza's will. Ransom himself half doubts whether all that happened was true, and he realizes that others will be even less inclined to believe it if he should speak of it. However, the author who did not previously know of Ransom's adventure, fortuitously writes to Ransom asking whether he has heard of the medieval Latin word Olyazes, and knows what it meant. This prompts Ransom to let Lewis in the secret. Ransom then dedicates himself to the mission that Olyaza gave him before he left Malacandra, stopping Weston from further evil. Ransom and Lewis then collaborate in the story, not in real life to compose and publish Out of the Silent Planet under the guise of fiction. They realize that only a few readers will recognize their story as describing real events, but since they anticipate that further conflict with Weston or the bent Olyaza of Earth will be forthcoming, they also desire simply to familiarize many readers with the ideas contained therein. Characters: Dr. Elwyn Ransom, a professor of philology at a college of the University of Cambridge, hence gifted with languages. He befriends first many Hrossa, then some Sorns, and at last Oyaza. Dr. Weston, a thick-set physicist, savage, arrogant and greedy, who considers himself ultra-civilized. He mocks classics and history and such trash in favor of the hard sciences and imperialism and, boasting to Ransom about his achievements in interplanetary travel, declares, "You cannot be so small-minded as to think that the rights of an individual or of a million individuals are of the slightest importance in comparison with this." Dick Devine, later a politician, Weston's power-hungry accomplice, possesses that kind of humor which consists in a perpetual parody of the sentimental or idealistic cliché copyrights of one's elders. He was quite ready to laugh at Weston's solemn scientific idealism. He didn't give a damn, he said, for the future of the species or the meeting of two worlds. He instead is motivated solely by greed for wealth. Hioi, Ransom's first Hross friend. They meet in Chapter 9, and Hioi begins to teach him the old solar language and the practical philosophy of the Hrossa. Hioi is murdered by Weston. Nohra, an older Hross who teaches Ransom to speak Old Solar. Orgray, a Sorn who saves Ransom from near death on his freezing mountaintop, asks him many questions about Earth, and carries him to Meldalorn to meet Oyaza. Kanaka Baraka, a Fifiltrig who carves Ransom's portrait onto a stone at Meldalorn. Oyaza is undying, wise, and compassionate. He is the greatest Eldila to visit Malacandra and functions as its ruler. Oyaza tells Ransom that he sent for Ransom to visit him from Thalcandra. Major themes. Reception. Peter Nichols describes Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra as planetary romances with elements of medieval mythology. Each planet is seen as having a tutelary spirit. Those of the other planets are both good and accessible, while that of Earth is fallen, twisted and not known directly by most humans. These two books are powerfully imagined, although their scientific content is intermittently absurd. Anna K. Nardo wrote that as the reader travels with Ransom into deep heaven, he too is introduced to worlds where myth comes true and where what are merely artificial constructs to delineate kinds of poetry on Earth become living realities in the heroic world of Mars and the pastoral world of Venus. Through identification with Ransom, the reader tastes what, Lewis seems to believe, is almost impossible in the modern world, pure epic and pure lyric experiences. Robert McClanagan writes, Out of the Silent Planet, the shortest and most straightforward of the Space Trilogy books, incorporates many of the elements of classic science fiction, including a space flight, meetings with fantastic aliens, and an extended depiction of another planet. Were it not for the theological backdrop, Out of the Silent Planet could pass as merely a well-written and exceptionally erudite pulp novel. John Gosling, on his website devoted to the War of the Worlds, wrote that the novel is a very well-written and important piece of Martian science fiction. Hrossa, Tsar copyright Roni, Fifiltrigai. On Malacandra there are three native nor, reasoning species such as humans. The Hrossa resemble bipedal otters or seals, and are somewhat taller and thinner than humans. Ransom finds them beautiful, covered, face and all, with thick black animal hair, and whiskered like a cat. Glossy coat, liquid eye, sweet breath and whitest teeth. They live in the low river valleys and specialize in farming, fishing, and performing arts such as dancing and poetry. They are especially gifted in making poetry. Yet they refuse to write it down as they believe that books ruin words and poems. Their technical level is low, and they wear only pocketed loincloths. The boats that they build are similar to our canoes. They add an initial sound to their words. Their sense of humor is extravagant and fantastic. The Tsar copyright Roni are thin, 15-foot-high humanoids having coats of pale feathers and seven-fingered hands. They live in mountain caves of a high country, though they often descend into the Handramit where they raise giraffe-like livestock. They are the scholars and thinkers of Malacandra, specializing in science and abstract learning. Their technical level is high, and they design machinery, which is built by the Fifiltrigai. Although they can write, they do not compose written works of history or fiction as they feel the Hrossa are superior at it. Their sense of humor seldom got beyond irony. The Fifiltrigai have tapir-like heads and frog-like bodies. They lean their elbows on the ground when at rest, and sometimes when working with their hands. Their movements are quick and insect-like. They are the builders and technicians of Malacandra. They build houses and gadgets thought up by the Tsar copyright Roni. They are miners who especially like to dig up sun's blood, and other useful and beautiful minerals. They are the only species said to wear a form of clothes, other than the Hossa, and even wear goggles to protect their eyes. Their sense of humor is sharp and excelled in abuse. Malacandra's Nor are unfallen free of the tendency to evil and sin that plagues humans. Ransom describes the emotional connection between the races as a cross between that of equals and that of person to an animal, mirrored in the way that humans tend to anthropomorphize pets. Members of the three races do not believe any one of the races to be superior to the others. They acknowledge, rather, that no single race can do everything. In the sequels it is made clear that the language of the Hossa is the primary Old Solar language, and that the languages of the other two species are late derivatives of it. This represents Lewis' view that the symbolic and mythopoeic imagination is the primary language of the human mind and that scientific and technological analysis is a later development. In the essay Bluspels and Flowerland Spheres, A Semantic Nightmare, he argues that, though reason is the organ of truth, imagination is the organ of meaning. Glossary, Arbala Euro the Sun, Kra Euro final section of a poem, Eldela Euro Spirit, Angel, Glundindra Euro Jupiter, Handrana Euro Earth's element, land, planet, Harandrana Euro High Earth, plateau, Handramata Euro Low Earth, valley, Loba Euro language, Lungthalina Euro long for, yearn for, desire, Nakra, PL Hna copyright Rakia Euro a vicious aquatic beast hunted by the Hossa. Its qualities could be those of a shark and a crocodile. Lewis may have borrowed the word from Germanic Nika, Old English Nika, N, meaning sea monster, or from the monster that is the object of Lewis Carroll's The Hunting of the Snark, Necropunt, PL Necropuntia Euro Necroslayer, nor a Euro rational creature, Onodraskrada Euro ground weed, Hresnia Euro female Hossa, Ha Euro blood, Malacandrana Euro a compound noun, formed with a prefix malak and the noun handra, which latter means earth, land, or planet, and referring to the fourth planet from the sun. In English, Mars, Maleldila Euro Jesus, the second person of God with the Old One, and the third one. Oyaza, PL. Oyar copyright Risu Euro ruler of a planet, a higher order angel, perhaps an archangel. Perelandra Euro a compound noun, formed with a prefix peril and the noun handra, which means earth, land, or planet, and referring to the second planet from the sun. In English, Venus, Thulcandra Euro a compound noun, formed with a prefix thulk, meaning silent, and handra, meaning earth, land, or planet, referring to the third planet from the sun. In English, silent planet, or earth, Wandilona Euro long for, yearn for, miss. The Hossa's word for to eat contains consonants unreproducible by the human mouth. It is not clear how that word would be pronounced on Venus, where Ransom, in the sequel, finds humans speaking the same language as that spoken by the Hossa. Western speech and its translation, the speech which Western delivers at the book's climax, and Ransom's effort to render it into the Old Solar spoken by the Malacandrians, demonstrate the enormous gulf in cultural and moral perceptions, which renders Western's value judgments utterly untranslatable and may be said to make them absurd, thus creating a sort of social criticism. The A-Euro-OE translation A-Euro that we read is to be understood as a back translation into English of what Ransom said in Old Solar. Publication history. Information has been gleaned from the Library of Congress, the Internet Speculative Fiction Database, and WorldCat. Hossa, Tsar copyright Roni, and Fafiltragai adopted, the Hossa, Tsar copyright Roni, and Fafiltragai are several of the races living on Mars in Larry Niven's 1999 novel Rainbow Mars. They are referred to as the pious ones by the Barsoomian races. The Hossa are called the Fishers, the Fafiltragai the Smiths, and the Tsar copyright Roni the High Folk. The Fafiltragai are one of the races who chose to ride to Earth on Yggdrasil. The Tsar copyright Roni appear at the beginning of the second volume of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen as one of the Martian races allied against the mollusk invaders. In Scarlet Traces, The Great Game, a hieroglyphics-filled chamber seems to show the Hrossa, Tsar copyright Roni, and Faflatragai as the original races of Mars, that were wiped out by the arrival of the War of the Worlds Martians. Notes. References. Further reading, Downing, David C., Planets in Peril, A Critical Study of C.S. Lewis's Ransom Trilogy. University of Massachusetts Press, 1992. ISBN 0-87023-997-X. External links, Cosmic Trilogy series listing of the Internet Speculative Fiction Database, Quotations and Allusions in C.S. Lewis, Out of the Silent Planet, by the English to Dutch translator Oreen Smilder, synopsis of Out of the Silent Planet, Out of the Silent Planet.